The cycle looks like this. God had a place of freedom for Israel to bring them into the promised land. And they were supposed to seek the Lord. And as they obeyed the Lord, the blessing of the Lord was there. But there was going to be this tremendous temptation to do evil. And that was to make friends with the enemies, to make friends and to marry in with the other nations. And as they married in with the other nations, God says, if you make friends with them, marry in with them, they will become a thorn in your flesh. And they give their daughters, and it says, when you marry them and they marry your sons, your children will not follow me. They will follow the idols of the age. Friends, it's still true. It's still true. This still happens. And so this was for the nation of Israel. And then, so now think about this. This is 12 o'clock. This is 12 o'clock. 3 o'clock, they do evil. They provoke God. They forsake God. 6 o'clock, they become slaves. Sin always leads to slavery. Sin always leads to bondage. Sin always leads to grieving. Sin always leads you to a place of problem. And it happens in the nation of Israel. And then in this place, they grovel in their sin. And sometimes it's for 8 years, sometimes it's for 80 years. But they're going to grovel in their sin. And then it isn't until they hit the bottom. How many of you have heard someone say, boy, I hope they hit the bottom soon? Why? Because when you hit the bottom and you realize you can't get out of your addiction, you can't get out of this bondage in and of yourself, you need God. You humble yourself before God. God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. You want to stay in here, be proud, be self-sufficient, stay as a slave. But when you humble yourself before God and there's this groaning, this like crying out to God, God is rich in mercy, it says. He has pity on those who are in a plight, and then he raises up a deliverer. And we're going to see this happen 7 times in the book of Judges. But this happens today. This happens in nations today. It happens in churches today. It happens in our own lives. The spin cycle is happening in America. You guys are watching the news every day at 5:15 this morning. I checked the news feeds really quick. I couldn't believe the things that I was seeing. How many of you have heard of a guy by the name of Bill Gates? All right? So Bill Gates, and listen, if you say that there is no God, then government ultimately has to become God. Someone has to rule. And so I just want you to see a little video clip of Bill Gates. I just want you to understand some of the things that are happening around you. Why are they happening? You know, people used to come to America because there was freedom here. But I want you to see how there's this movement. We're forsaking God. We're provoking him. We forsake the what is right and wrong. We forsake that, and it's always going to lead to bondage. Listen to what Bill Gates says. He says, how does a person who's as smart as he is, I mean, he's smarter than me. He's richer than me too, just so you know, right? But how does a smart guy end up wanting this? Just listen to this. It's amazing.
You have this new book out, How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. And it begins by saying, hey, we got to learn the lessons from this past pandemic. Let me ask you about a specific lesson. What did we learn from the countries that actually handled this well?
Well, there weren't many countries, but a few responded very quickly to scale up the level of diagnostics. And then they had quarantine policies that were well adhered to. So Australia stands out, and their death rate is about 10% of other rich countries. So pretty dramatic benefit.
Wow. Australia is the example on how to prevent. How many of you remember this? I showed you this earlier. This is the Howard Springs Institution for the quarantiners. Now, it doesn't matter what the Constitution said. It doesn't matter what the Bill of Rights said. It doesn't matter about any of that. Remember, we talked about inalienable rights. Why is that important? Because rights do not come from governments. They come from God. And so if you believe in inalienable rights and you say, no, government is God, we think you're a threat to society, we're going to put you in this camp. He says, is this still going on? Well, as of December, according to the BBC, December 1st, 2021, just a couple months ago, 3 people, hardened criminals, escaped from this place. Thank heavens the police caught them. How does someone like Bill Gates not understand that freedom, liberty, is a blessing to be cherished and not surrendered over? Well, I just want you to know that the World Health Organization receives funding from 2 major sources, the United States and from the Bill Gates Foundation. And I want you to see this. You might say, this will never happen in America. This could never happen in America. Bill Gates would like to see this happen in America. You don't believe it? Watch this.
Congressman Bachmann, Dean Bachmann, you were the first one to kind of bring this to our attention. You were in the war room last week. Walk us through, because people are just getting their hands around it right now. We're going to have Frank Gaffney on, Dr. Naomi Wolf. What exactly is going on in Geneva at the World Health Organization, and how do we get so far down the road of it looks like signing something that's going to expand the sovereignty, the ability of the World Health Organization in Geneva, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, to affect the sovereignty of the United States of America?
That's right. It's hard to believe, Steve, but in less than 2 weeks' time, a vote will take place in Geneva, Switzerland at the World Health Assembly. They're important because they're the governing body of the World Health Organization, WHO. This authority that they would be given would impact 99.4% of all the people in the world. There are 193 nations belonging to the UN. The Biden administration is bringing amendments that would propose that all nations of the earth cede their sovereignty over national health care decisions to the WHO.
Did you hear that? So the 22nd, starting next week, Geneva, the U.S. government is putting forth measures so that not only the United States, but everyone else submits to the World Health Organization. So if they say, oh, we've got a crisis, we got to shut down America, all of you, no churches, can't drive, no, they get to decide. How many of you voted for them? I mean, do you understand the implication, beloved, do you understand the implications of this? And so many people are like, oh, this is going to be wonderful. It's going to lead to bondage. And it's going to lead to hardship. And so what I want you to catch with me as we go through the book of Judges, listen, these cycles of tyranny, of governments, is nothing new. We're going to see it over and over in the Old Testament. We're going to see this to other nations, including the nation of Israel. We're going to see this in reference to churches. Jesus is going to correct churches. God calls them to live in truth and freedom and righteousness. And we're going to see in the book of Revelation later on, in chapter 2 and chapter 3, he confronts them, and there's consequences to their sin, and when they humble themselves, they find his blessing. So we're going to look at the verses so we understand the cycle. We're going to talk about mastering the art of war, and then we're going to talk about living in the state of freedom. So let's just start with understanding the cycle. And I showed this to you last week, that your theology directly impacts your politics. You see, why not have the government make all of this? And when we go through the book of Judges, we're going to see the geopolitical situation changing all the time. Why is the geopolitical situation changing all the time? It was directly related to how the people of that day related to God. So the Canaanite nations, for 450 years, rebelled against God, did what was evil, worshipped idols. God was patient. And at the end of 450 years, what changed the geopolitical situation? Their sin got so bad, God says their iniquities are full. That's it. That's how it changed. Israel is not exempt. God's people aren't exempt from the cycle. When they end up rebelling against God, the geopolitical situation will change. So we're going to see the Moabite nation come in and attack Israel, and they're going to be slaves for 80 years. Why? Because they forsook God. So your theology impacts your politics. And politics directly impacts your life. How many of you paid a lot for gas today? Or this week? Why did that happen? Because there's a geopolitical situation occurring that's telling us we've got to save Mother Earth, so therefore we can't drill, at least in the United States, but we can have people drill in other parts of the world and we'll just use their oil. There's something bigger and more sinister behind it, but you get my point. That politics directly impacts your life. Now I want you to understand this. Your life is always moving towards either freedom or slavery. So you're either moving towards 12 o'clock or you're moving towards 6 o'clock on the chart. Does that make sense? It's huge. You got to get this clear in your head. You're either up here and then you're maintaining your position here. It's going to take effort and work and war, as we'll see in just a moment. But you're either going to be moving to evil and provoking God into forsaking God, and they're in bondage. You're either moving this direction, or maybe we're in this direction, and then we humble ourselves and we move back towards freedom. Why? Because God shows pity upon us when we groan, and he raises up a deliverer, a rescuer. So we're going to see this cycle over and over and over again.